Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. Hey Health Junkies, on this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing Chris Mirabile. He's a biohacker and he has proved that you can slow down the pace of aging. And in fact, he slowed down his by 37%. So Chris was completely determined to help others do the same. And so he actually created a company called Novos, and it's really the first science-backed nutraceutical company that can address 10 biological causes of aging with their nutraceutical products. That's pretty cool. So he and I are going to geek out today on this podcast and give you just an insight into his products, but also what you can do to boost your energy and slow down aging. So if you're interested in living a longer but healthier and active life, this podcast is for you. Let's introduce you to Chris.
Hey, Health Junkies. Welcome to another episode of The Health Fix. I've got Chris Mirabile on, and we're going to be talking about his business, but we're also going to be talking about how cool it is to be younger than your biological age. And of course, if you listened to my podcast before where I talked about my testing I've done, Chris has done the same. And so we're going to geek out a little bit and maybe create a little competition as to who can reverse their aging faster. So Chris, welcome to Health Fix podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So, I've listened to previous podcasts of yours and I went through all the info, kind of geeked out on the website for a while, and I have a lot of questions. But because folks love a good story, and it seems that you have quite the background in terms of going from brain tumor status to biohacker to multiple businesses, and here you are today. So give us a little background on Chris and how you came to be fascinated with being younger for longer.
Sure. So my story begins when I was 12 years old, and I promise I won't go year by year. We'll skip a few years in the process. But when I was 12, I became interested in exercise and health because I picked up an issue of Men's Health magazine. I was inspired by it and installed a pull-up bar in my basement of the house I grew up in. And every single day, religiously, I was exercising and began watching what I was eating. And then fast forward to when I was 16 years old, I was suddenly stopped in my tracks when I had a seizure while in New York City at the Federal Reserve Bank for a school trip. Yeah. In fact, the seizure, the security was so high, they were afraid that it may have been a security threat. So they wouldn't let my teacher who escorted me to call 911 because there's so much gold in the basement of the building I was in. Rumored to be more gold there than anywhere else in the world. But anyway, just an interesting fact about that experience. But it was discovered that I had a brain tumor. That is what caused the seizure. It was on my left temporal lobe, larger than a golf ball. They had to do a emergency surgery. And that completely changed my perspective on life in general and health specifically. It went from an interest in health that was more superficial. I just wanted to look good, be attractive to the girls in school, and do well in sports, to one that became biologically driven. So I wanted to avoid disease. I didn't want to have another brain tumor again or anything else that had me laying in a hospital bed, questioning if I would live another day and contemplating mortality. So that's where my interest really deepened in health. And over the years, as you mentioned, I became an entrepreneur. So I studied at NYU Stern, studied business, and started a social network called Hotlist. And then multiple other businesses after that. But I was all the while deeply interested in health. So all of my friends, since I was a teenager, would say, why aren't you becoming a doctor? Or why didn't you become a doctor? On PubMed, just going straight to the research articles or the research journals to try to get to the truth of the information and form my own hypotheses and perspectives on things. And so went as far as, in my 20s, sequencing my genome to try to understand if that's what led to my brain tumor, if there were any clues there. And long story short, come my late 20s, early 30s, I began biohacking. And I was experimenting with different diets, different supplements, different lifestyle routines, sleep hacking, and so on. And as I was doing it, I had this question, this nagging question in the back of my mind, which was, is what I'm doing good for me, not only in the short term, but in the long term also? And the answer, unfortunately, was oftentimes, no, it's not, or we don't know. And that I couldn't accept, particularly because of what I had gone through with my brain tumor and that context in mind. So I started to think, well, what is good for me both today and in the long term? What has science shown to be good throughout your life? And that's when I stumbled upon longevity science and the seminal paper published in the journal Cell, I believe that was 2013, which identified the 9 hallmarks of aging. And so to understand that aging is is caused by multiple biological processes, that many scientists believe it's not inevitable. It is something that we can slow down or even reverse or maybe even stop at some point in the future. That gave me a completely different perspective on aging, on health, and everything I wanted to achieve for myself. So that's when I began networking with scientists in the field, changing my self-experimentation, the types of data I was collecting about myself, and was really the foundation from which I would eventually launch my company, Novos.
It's a journey that I think I've definitely been on, and questions, having that question, like you said, of like, well, am I doing really what is it really going to work? Is it going to be long? Is it sustainable? Is it actually, doing what it's intended? And I think a lot of people have that general question about anything in medicine, let alone alternative medicine, things of that nature. And, it seems like as we keep progressing, more and more different supplements, protocols, things of that nature come out, and folks keep, going, well, I don't know, what about this one? But you've got quite a team. Like you said, you teamed up with some scientists, and of course you've got them on your website. So folks, you could go to Novos, Novos labs.com and check out these folks. How did you make friends with the scientists? What'd you do? You got some
good question.
Like heavy hitters on board. Like, folks, no joke, he's got some heavy hitter scientists on board. So
yeah, like George Church, for example, he's a scientist at both Harvard Medical School and MIT, as if one wasn't enough. And he invented the first method for direct genome sequencing in 1984. He's a legend in the biology community, and he's also very interested in longevity and extending human lifespan from a genetics perspective. We have Matt Caberline as a consultant for us, who was he's the one behind the dog aging project that you may have heard of, which is administering the prescription drug rapamycin to slow down aging and prevent disease in dogs. And this was on the cover of Time magazine, for example. We've got a total of six scientific advisors that come from Harvard, MIT, the Salk Institute. And then behind the scenes, unofficially, we talk with regularly dozens of other scientists in the field to get their perspectives on everything from our formulations to our scientific studies that we're running and so on. So how did I get them on board? That's my secret, I guess, right? It's I guess I can tell you one quick story is I was at NYU Hospital volunteering. So that's where my brain tumor was removed, and I wanted to give back. So I was volunteering with the pediatric ward for children going through similar things that I had gone through. And one day when I was leaving, I was already thinking about longevity and what can I do in the space. And I saw a poster on the wall that got me so excited. It's called the Mitochondrial Summit. So most people don't get excited by seeing that, but for me, that was what was always on my mind, or one of the things that was. And I saw researchers whose names I was familiar with the research of. And so I went to that conference, and I would corner the researchers and ask them questions specifically about natural substances, natural supplements, things that are not FDA regulated, that you can buy from a nutrition shop. And their impacts on these different either hallmarks of aging or biopathways that have been found to favorably impact aging, things like mTOR or AMP kinase, FOXO genes, and so on. And I was surprised to find how optimistic these scientists were about these studies and these natural ingredients. I was under the false assumption that they were going to be pessimistic, which the medical establishment in general, right? MDs tend to be, not always, but tend to be very skeptical of anything natural that's not produced by a pharmaceutical company. And I could get into why I think that's the case, and you probably know even better than I do why that's the case, right? But PhDs, although there are exceptions, for the most part, they're just looking at the scientific studies and the data that they get from it. And they're just very curious people, always looking for the truth, so to speak, with not the same agenda behind it. And so that was really eye-opening for me. And it was a validation point that the idea I was pursuing had legs. And from there began networking more and more with scientists and put together a vision. And that's ultimately what it was to sell them on a vision that I was creating something significantly different than what already existed out there on the biotech or pharma side or on the supplementation side, that we were going to be a very responsible company that kind of took the best from both of those industries and merged it together into one single company.
That's awesome, right? And looking at the data, I'm a data geek. That's where I live. I'm always asking questions, always wanting to know more about certain things. And just looking at all the people you teamed up with, I was like, that's why I was like, you need to dream team. Like every article that I pined over, and the Mitochondria Summit, guys, who are listening, it's like heaven for geeks. Like anything mitochondria is my happy place. But that being said, I'm sure a lot of folks are going like, okay, great, that's nice. I just want to turn back aging. So tell us the goods, guys. Tell us the goods. So obviously, you have your products, but I think before we head to that, and before we talk about the ingredients that you have in your anti-aging products, I want to talk about the testing that kind of led you into all this, because folks who are listening to this, if you've listened to some of my previous podcasts, I talked with Hannah Went from True Diagnostic and how I was 7 years younger than my biological age. But Chris is 13. And as I mentioned in the quick intro here, we now have a competition because I'm shooting for 14. Tell us a little bit about the testing and how you came to find True Diagnostic and how you were like, this is the test I want in terms of geeking out on aging.
Sure. So I had for many years been tracking a lot of different markers and biomarkers, everything from blood labs, which I maintain an Excel spreadsheet and have my own ranges for what I think is the most healthy based on research rather than what the lab tells us is the healthy range, right? My iPhone, my Oura Ring, my Apple Watch, everything is being tracked, right? I like you, love data. And so, but when it came specifically to aging and longevity, there's much more to the story. Of course, there are these surrogate markers. There are things that can be correlated with aging. For example, resting heart rate or visceral fat and so on, right? Which start to change as you get older. And I strive to maintain levels that are significantly below my chronological age, that are ideally, at least at this point in my life, more in like mid-20s for all of these different markers. But that doesn't necessarily prove that I have slowed down aging, so to speak. It just maybe shows that I'm physically fit and committed to a healthy lifestyle. When it comes to measuring biological age, there's a lot of progress there, and in particular on the side of epigenetic tests. So there are all of these different omics, and so you have proteomic tests and transcriptomic tests and metabolomic tests and all of these big words for tests, right? And at one point, we thought that telomeres would be the best way to measure one's biological age, because the telomeres, which are end caps of your chromosomes that protect your DNA, they get shorter with time. But they've been kind of disappointing when it comes to measuring biological age, specifically because there's a wide range that you can have at any age of your telomere length. So for example, you might be 20 years old and have the same length as someone who's 40 years old, and you can both be perfectly healthy and biologically aging at a good rate. So it's not as strong of a correlation to mortality risk and morbidity as researchers had hoped it would be. But epigenetic testing has been found very well correlated with things like morbidity and mortality. These other omics that I mentioned, they show promise, but they're just not as far along, or in some cases they might be just more technically difficult to execute on, where the epigenetic testing has been shown to be making fantastic progress. So epigenetic tests, there are many different epigenetic tests out there. You have the first generation tests that were their target for the algorithm was to try to match the chronological age. But then researchers realized that it's probably more important to look at the cellular health and essentially the biological age, which equates to the mortality risk and the morbidity risk. And so second generation clocks, and now we have third generation clocks, are correlated to that. So to your question, when we were doing research in the field and talking to scientists in the field, the question was, what is the best way to measure biological age? And we eventually arrived at the perspective that as of now, and this is constantly changing, but as of now, epigenetic tests are the best way to do it. And then looking at different laboratories that could execute on epigenetic tests, some have private algorithms where it's a black box, and even if they are accurate, they didn't really have scientific scrutiny. And so that's not something we wanted. We wanted something that scientists were able to scrutinize and look underneath the hood for. And True Diagnostic was appealing to us because they have worked with multiple different labs, and they have the rights to be able to utilize multiple different epigenetic labs. And so that's what I turned to for running the initial tests, and got many different epigenetic clock results from it.
Excellent. Excellent. And of course, you have it on the Novos Labs website, your Novos age testing, which folks could use to figure out, okay, where am I starting at before they would jump into using your products? Hopefully they would do that, so they have a before and after. But I do find that it doesn't always end up that way.
Right. Of course.
And in terms of monitoring for these types of things, what is your typical kind of recommendation for folks once they get started? They jump in to your program, and folks, we're going to talk about that here in a second. Maybe I should talk about that first, because this seems kind of out of order. Let's jump into that first. So Chris has, literally, guys, no joke, a packet that you could take to help with your it's basically called the daily longevity mix, and it helps with reversing the aging for you. It kind of gives you the key things. So tell us a little bit about how you created the Novos Core and the Novos Boost. Like, give us a scoop on those, and then we'll talk about how frequent to test in between, because I like to go right to the testing because I'm a nerd.
Right, sure. So yes, Novos Core is our foundational product. This was my original vision when thinking of starting a company in the space. I wanted to create an all-in-one solution, something that I could take every day that was very easy and convenient. I didn't have to think about or fumble with many different pill bottles and so on, and that I could then give to my family members and friends who were they would be that much less compliant than I would, right? So when it comes to having to buy multiple pills and take them every day, they're even less likely than I would be to do that. And so we set upon a journey, really, to figure out what would be the best formulation to slow down aging. And the unique approach we took that no one had done, or I believe even has done to this point, was to formulate through the lens of the 10 hallmarks of aging. So rather than just finding ingredients that have extended lifespan in animals, which is like the easy way to do it, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to have as much of an impact as there is potential for, we wanted to address each one of the hallmarks of aging, everything from the epigenome to mitochondrial health, stem cells, proteostasis, cellular senescence, all of them. And so we really dug into the research and we looked at 100 different ingredients that were viable candidates for the formulation. We had to make sure that they were all very, very safe, that there was no potential for side effects. Even if low, we wanted to minimize that as much as possible. First, do no harm, of course. And then we also wanted to see if the ingredients were able to extend lifespan across multiple different species, because that would hint at the ingredients being the mechanism through which the ingredient was working being evolutionarily conserved. And that increases the likelihood that it is conserved within human biology as well. So there's a list of about 10 different filters we put the ingredients through, that if you go to novoslabs.com/evidence, you can see those filters. It's at the start of the page. And then that page also has more than 190 scientific studies that we turned to back up the inclusion of the ingredients, as well as scientific studies that we've independently run through third-party research labs at typically universities to find the positive effects of our formulation. So that's Novos Core, and that's something that you tear open a sachet, you pour it into your water. It's orange flavored. We will have an unflavored version in just a few weeks' time, in case you wanted to mix it into like a smoothie or something. And we have Novos Boost. Novos Boost is one single ingredient. It's a powerful ingredient. It's NMN, nicotinamide mononucleotide. Why did we not include it in Novos Core? The truth is we wanted to at first, but the cost was prohibitively expensive. And we didn't want to make Novos Core inaccessible for people, because Core is the most powerful solution out there. NMN, we call it Boost for a reason. It's like a booster on top, but everything we include in Novos Core is that much more powerful in addressing all 10 hallmarks. So what we tell people is ideally you take Core and Boost. If you can't afford to take Core and Boost, then ideally you take just Core. And if you can't afford Core, which if you buy a 12-month plan, it's $79 a month, so just over $2 a day, then Novos Boost is a good entry-level product, which is about $33 a month if you do a 12-month plan for that.
You know, I look at it, I'm like $2 a day to not spend thousands on your health in the long run. You know, it's such a huge savings. I mean, when I look at it as thinking of it as like your own personal health insurance of sorts to help you. And, you know, I think it's very decently priced. And that being said, now you've talked about the Core and the Boost and how you take them. How long would someone wait? Like, obviously we had talked briefly that it's probably best to do a test before, so you know your baseline. And then how long do you have people wait before they repeat the testing to see, okay, how are these things working for me?
Yeah. So first of all, when it comes to like investing in the future, something worth mentioning is also that we formulated the product so that it would also have some short-term benefits as well. Things like improvements to skin health, improvements to mood, and improvements to energy and cognition. So that depending on which one, and depending on how young or old you are, how healthy you already are, and so on. It can vary in terms of how long it takes to see it, but typically within as little as a few days, people might notice improvements in mood or sleep. And then after about 1 to 2 months, a majority of people notice improvements in skin health. That's not the reason to take Novos, but it's a nice to have, if you will. And then to your question of like how often to test. So yes, ideally you test before taking Novos, but also before you follow. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear my dog.
We're gonna get mine yourself.
Okay. I have a collie like Lassie, and she's sad that her mother has just walked out of the home. But we say ideally you test before taking Novos and before following the Novos longevity program. So we have a lifestyle in terms of diet plan and other things that you can follow to try to slow down your aging based on research, right? And then we suggest that you test once every 12 months. Now, you could test more frequently. You could go like the Dunedin Pace Clock, which we offer through Novos Age. You could see changes in as little as 3 months potentially, but we're concerned about the potential for confounding factors. So different seasons. If you give me a second,
I'm laughing because my dog is going nuts over here, and I'm like pressing mute because he just keeps going.
Yeah. She'll calm down in a second, but
it's fine. It's fine. We love critters on this podcast.
Okay, great.
But I apologize. I interrupted your Dunedin Pace conversation, and 3 months is kind of the typical time frame.
But yeah, like to be able to see a difference. But what we're concerned about is the idea of seasonality, right? So every 3 months is a new season essentially, and your lifestyle changes every 3 months significantly, even if you don't realize it. But something as simple as like time spent outdoors and getting UV light and the hormonal and epigenetic changes that come from getting UV light. Your exercise routine might change, your diet might change, your alcohol consumption, your vacation time, your stress levels, your time spent with friends and family, and so on. Compare December 27th to July 27th. It's a very different lifestyle, right?
Absolutely.
So to that point, we suggest you take it once every 12 months on ideally the same day or the same week or the same month at least, to minimize those confounding factors and to really see what direction you're going with your biological age and your pace of aging. Now, I'd love to say buy it every 3 months. It would mean more revenue for us, right? But in terms of, we're really looking at this as what is best for the customer. And we're a public benefit corporation. We very much want to improve the health span and lifespan of as many people as possible, whether they buy our products or not. So 12 months is the magic number, we think, to maximize the value of your money. If money is no object, then sure, do it every 3 months.
Well, and I have some people who definitely are working on harder core protocols, things of that nature, that are training for certain things, and they want to see like where are they at, things of that nature. And I think depending on your goals and whatnot, if you're just curious and biohacking away, then a year works. I personally have done mine. I'm coming up on my year now to repeat it. So I'm like, oh, crunch is on. I hope I'm gonna get to those 14 years. I got to give you a little run for your money on that one.
Right.
I have a big jump to go there. But no, you have, just looking at the Novos Core, I was looking at kind of what was in it before, a lot of things that I absolutely love. And the interesting one was the lithium in there. Can you speak a little bit to lithium? Because I use lithium orotate for anxiety, mood things, and you were talking about the short change for the mood. Is that what the lithium is there for, or what is the intended purpose for that?
So lithium, just from a very general epidemiological level, has been shown that in communities where lithium is naturally in the water supply, like through natural well water, for example, there's significantly lower rates of depression, of suicide, but even things like murder and rape as well. It is something, very, very significant about this ingredient lithium. Now, when people think of lithium, they're also oftentimes thinking of either phone batteries, or they're thinking of the very high psychiatric doses that are administered for bipolar disorder. What we're talking about is microdosing of lithium. So 1 milligram of lithium, for example, and in the psychiatric setting, it's 60, 100 times plus higher than that. So very, very different effects, very different side effects, like kidney issues can happen if you're getting the prescription dose. Microdosing, there's never been reports of that. In fact, if anything, it could potentially improve kidney health. So getting to the science behind it, lithium can have positive impacts on the epigenome, and it can also have a lot of support for the for brain aging, essentially for cognitive health. And in multiple species where they've done studies of administering lithium to those species, it has extended the lifespan of those species. So lithium is actually, of all of our ingredients, I would say it's one of the more powerful ones in our formulation.
I had to ask because of somewhat of that, but also because I know people are going to be like, lithium, what? Everything else in terms of the ingredients kind of makes sense. Things people have heard of per se before. Really great combination of things in it. And a lot of women have probably heard of hyaluronic acid for the skin side of things, which is what you had mentioned. And then I think the other thing that there's two, I can never say this one right. It comes from the apples of the facetin.
I say fisetin, but yeah, some people say facetin, and it's like my last name. It's all over the place.
Same thing as the other one, the pterostilbene. Like that one, I've heard other people say multiple different ways, but these are essentially antioxidants, correct? For folks who are looking at the ingredients and kind of trying to get an idea of what are these going to do for me in particular.
Yes, but what I would mention about antioxidants is that there's kind of like two categories of antioxidants, and everyone refers to them as one thing, as an antioxidant. But you've got antioxidants that are intercepting inflammatory molecules, for example, something like vitamin E. And in these cases, getting too high of a dosage of the antioxidant can actually have negative effects. It can actually shorten lifespan. There are studies that show high levels of vitamin E will shorten lifespan. There's another category of antioxidants where they're actually somewhat pro-oxidant, but they have a hormetic effect on the body, and then the net effect is the body comes back stronger with by upregulating its own antioxidant defenses, right? And so pterostilbene is one of those types of molecules, just like resveratrol, where it can have a little bit of this hormetic effect, but then lead to stronger mitochondrial health, for example, or improvements on the epigenome and so on.
Okay. Thanks for mentioning that. It is one of the things that it's not talked about a lot in terms of antioxidants, like the good and the dark side, let's put it that way, of those things. And I think for a lot of people, it's important to hear that. So another thing that I wanted to mention just with the boost, because a lot of folks that listen to my podcast are interested in NAD and liposomal NAD and injectable NAD. And then they're thinking, okay, what about true Niagen? Give us the scoop on why boost is different from those sorts of things. I mean, obviously molecular, but kind of give us a little rundown on what you would tell folks so that they kind of have an idea of why synergistically it works better with your product versus buying something else on the market that has NMN.
Sure. So first to the topic of NAD. So NAD, people who are getting NAD injections, those are arguably that's probably the most powerful way to raise your NAD levels. The issue is it's very expensive. It takes multiple hours. It can cause a lot of pain to your muscles. And so that's not for everyone. If it's something that you want to do, then by all means. What we offer in Novos Boost is the ability to increase your NAD levels in a more affordable and less time-consuming, simpler way. It's these two tiny little pills that you have every morning to start your day, and they've been shown to be able to increase NAD levels. There are other products out there, primarily that are focused on nicotinamide riboside, or NR. We believe that the research has shown that NMN is superior to nicotinamide riboside. In fact, there were studies that were recently published that basically said that the nicotinamide riboside, the NR that you ingest, is largely converted in the stomach to niacin, essentially, and that the remaining amount that hasn't been in the liver tends to convert much of that. And then, the defense oftentimes is that, well, NAD levels still went up. Well, yes, but NAD levels will go up if you take niacin as well. the problem is that taking too much of niacin can have negative effects on things like sirtuins and so on. So it's not the best path to follow to increase the NAD levels, where NMN has been found to not run into those types of issues. So we actually have an article on our website. If you go to novoslabs.com and you click the magnifying glass in the top right corner and you search NR versus NMN, you'll see all of the different arguments for why NMN is superior to NR, and not to mention Dr. David Sinclair at Harvard, who has access to all of these molecules. He makes a personal choice to take NMN, which I think is kind of telling that one of the world authorities on the subject matter is not combining the two. He's just taking pure NMN, about a gram or so of it a day.
I love that you mentioned that, because I was kind of hoping you would go into that, because the blog, guys, has fascinating stuff and research backed data, things of that nature, stuff I love, but just great info and articles like that folks will have questions on, especially when it's related to anti-aging. So one of the questions that I had, because I always poll my folks a little bit, in my office or whoever I'm talking to, like, hey, what do you want to learn on this podcast? My one was, what's the perfect age to start working on your longevity, is what kind of came up to in a conversation with some folks. Like, do we start when we're in 20s? Do we start when we're 10? I know there's not 100% data on that, but what's your opinion? What's your thought on that?
It's a great question, and it's a timely question as well. I'm doing a webinar next week. By the time this podcast comes out, it will probably have passed, but it will be on YouTube. So if you search Novos and longevity tests, you'll probably find that webinar. One of the slides in that webinar actually addresses exactly this question. And what I'm basing the recommendation on is the rate at which people start to get diseases of aging and the number of diseases of aging. So many people, they don't only get one disease of age. At some point, they get a second one and a third one and so on. And it progresses over time. So when you are a child and a teenager, the number of people, or the percentage of the population with a disease of aging, is relatively constant. It's when you hit 25 years old and into about 35 years old where you start seeing significant increases. It's still relatively low compared to what it will become when you're 70, right? Because it's an exponential curve. But in terms of the likelihood, it's now increasing by 30%, 60%, 100%, and so on. And so my suggestion would be, it's never too early to start living a healthy lifestyle that would be, pro longevity. So essentially slowing down aging and extending healthy lifespan. But if you had to pick a time, and you could, I would say like around 25 to 35, that's a sweet spot where you can prevent the disease from happening before it happens, before it's too late. Now, with that said, even if you're older than that, that's all the more reason why you should, because now the rates are going exponential. And so you should immediately start, changing your lifestyle and thinking about lifespan and longevity. But 25 to 35 is when I would say it's more important than if you were only 15 years old, for example.
Makes sense, especially with what we know, like you said, with research showing like when we really start to see that compounded effect. I feel like 35 on the dot, I started noticing things. I was like, oh man, I thought I was going to get out of this, from my lifestyle. But, here it is, right? We all have certain things. We have the epigenetics, things of that nature, but we also have some straight up genetics that are going to predispose us to certain things. And so folks, this is like an extra insurance policy, as I look at it, for taking things that can help you with your longevity. And really, obviously you can't supplement your way out of not having a healthy lifestyle. I would probably guess that you would support the concept of you could take these supplements, but if you're going to be eating junk food and not working out and not taking care of yourself, maybe it might help. I don't know. We need some data on that.
Right. Yeah. So, I would say it probably helps, but it's almost like if you're eating a really unhealthy diet, but you decide to go for a 30-minute walk every day, you're going to be healthier than the person who sits on the couch every day, right? But how much of a difference, like, are you, yeah, it'll make a difference, but you might still end up getting a disease or passing away earlier than what you should have. One of the ingredients I'll just give as an example, like within Novos Core is glucosamine sulfate. And there was a meta-analysis done in the United Kingdom of more than 100,000 people and the supplements they took. And the one that really stood out as having a positive impact on lifespan and health span was glucosamine. And this is for average people in the United Kingdom, which is a country with obesity rates close to or comparable to the United States, right? So they're not exactly the most healthy people across the world. And they found that ingredient was able to help, right, for extending health span and lifespan. Another example would be the prescription drug metformin, which is also looked at as a longevity substance. I have reservation for it being healthy for already healthy people. But if you have blood glucose issues, if you are overweight, then it has been shown to extend healthy lifespan potentially even further than for the average non-diabetic person, right? There's a lot of details behind that and subtleties and reasons why I don't think it's necessarily good for already healthy people. That's a whole other topic. And just one other thing I wanted to mention when you said genetics versus lifestyle, there was a study that actually found that in terms of the impact that your genetics will have on your lifespan, it's about 25 to 35% within that range, and the remainder is lifestyle. Now, and that higher percentage of 35% tends to be more applicable to centenarians and super centenarians. Live to 100, 110, 120, that is more genetic. But to be able to live a very healthy life until you're 90, 95, that is something that is less genetic and more lifestyle. But in both cases, it's still predominantly lifestyle.
That's huge. That's huge. And I'm glad you mentioned that about metformin, because I myself agree that, yes, if you have blood sugar issues, by all means, but I do have a lot of folks who have jumped on the wagon of like, I'm going to take metformin just to keep my blood sugar, good. And then we've got hemoglobin A1C. So folks are listening, that's your blood sugar over time. We have low ones that scare me a little bit in that case. And I start to think, what could that impact long term with all the low suppressed blood sugars?
Right. Well, and not only that, like if you take someone like myself, I exercise a lot and I put a lot of stress already on my mitochondria. Metformin induces stress on the mitochondria. It is one of the ways in which you have better blood glucose levels. It's because the mitochondria are having that much more trouble doing their job, so to speak. So they're taking in more glucose and using that for their energy. And so if you're already putting the strain on your mitochondria from exercise, for example, and then you're also adding on additional strain from the metformin, I think it's probably just going beyond hormetic doses of health improving interventions to something that can have a net negative yield. And there were a couple of studies done where they looked at the effect of taking metformin while exercising or after exercising, and they found that it actually reduced the beneficial effects of the exercise and the adaptations in terms of muscle size and cardiovascular fitness and so on from the exercise. So there are studies being done, like Nir Barzilai is doing the TAME study. It's, I believe, like a $60 million study to look at healthy people and them taking it. But you also have to consider, like, what is the definition of healthy? Like in the United States, with the number of pre-diabetic people out there in terms of proportion of society, or those who are diabetic and don't even know it, those people they would benefit from the metformin. But for the, and I think of that when I think of the meta-analysis in the United Kingdom, where they looked at these people who were taking metformin and diabetic. They lived longer than the non-diabetics who were not taking metformin, right? But what was the health status of the non-diabetics in the first place? were they like average, so to speak, people who are already somewhat unhealthy and they already are pre-diabetic, so to speak? Those are a lot of unanswered questions, and that might explain why they performed better than the quote unquote healthy people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think with any research study, you want to dive in a little bit more, read between the lines, folks, and,
Right.
just get a better opinion of what's going on there. And of course, always see who funded it. Now, question about heart rate variability, because you were talking about heart rate, and I won't drill you too much more. This is one more thing that I love to talk about a lot is heart rate variability, parasympathetic time, in that mode. What have you found in terms of that connection with aging and heart rate, watching the heart rate variability? What's your opinion there? Good thing to monitor, not so great, better things to look at?
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to look at. I don't know if there's specific research indicating that of like a direct connection to biological age and your HRV levels, but there's a difference between biomarkers that are indicative of your current state and your future health state. In other words, how well you are doing right now, and then the longer term implications. An example would be blood labs, right? Like having a high HbA1c doesn't mean that you're biologically old today, but having a high HbA1c means that you're going to age more quickly, and you're going to have more glycation and poor proteostasis and so on. So negative things are going to happen over time from having that high blood lab level. So I tend to think of HRV as being a kind of like a leading indicator, if you will, of what can come in the future if you aren't properly addressing it. So you want your HRV to be as high as possible, where your parasympathetic nervous system is engaged and you're not always in this fight or flight sympathetic state. Because overall you're going to have lower cortisol levels, your body is going to be less of a state of stress, and that overall is good for healthy aging. The thing about HRV is that it's kind of like individualistic, so you have to look at your own numbers relative to your own numbers, rather than comparing to your friends who, I have a friend who averages like 150 for their HRV, even after like tough workouts, and I think I've hit 151 time in 4 years of using the Oura Ring, right?
Yeah.
But on the low end, I might be at 20, and on the high end, typically I might be at 80. So that's my range that I then try to tune to, and I don't base it on what his numbers are.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, it's great that you mentioned that individually. And I'd be curious, over time, I'm definitely going to dive into using Novos Core and Boost and see what happens with my HRV. I'll report back to you, and see, if I'm looking if anything's different over on the whole. Obviously I have workout things that are going to affect that too. But, I think it's another good way to kind of measure what we're doing here as we're working on slowing down that aging. So we've talked a lot of things. We've went through a lot of different realms in the aging universe. Let's have folks kind of know where they can find you, where they can go to YouTube. You had mentioned your YouTube channel. Also, we've talked about Novos Labs. Are you guys on Instagram, those kind of things too? Give us a scoop.
Yes, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, now even TikTok, which I guess I'm feeling chronologically old because I'm not even on TikTok at this point. And then of course our website. So all of it is Novos Labs, novoslabs.com, or hashtag Novos Labs, YouTube as well. And then I have my own personal blog that I launched about 3 months ago, which gives my results and then also my personal lifestyle and the things that I'm doing. So hopefully it can serve as clues for people for their own lifestyles, or inspiration for people to dig deeper into longevity. And that is slowmyage.com. Okay. And I'm also on Twitter and Instagram as slowmyage.
Nice. Yeah, I'm curious. We'll have to check that out, folks. You heard that, slowmyage.com. I think I think the biggest thing is that folks like to hear stories. and they like to see what someone else is doing, kind of what, maybe glean a little info from you, and then, kind of put it all together. So Chris, thank you so much for sharing your story, letting me drill you on all kinds of my geeky questions, and sharing Novos Labs with us, because I do think what you've got going on here is quite impressive. The formula is unique. I haven't seen anything else like that before. And hey, I'm looking forward to trying it out. By the time this podcast comes out, I will have tried it out for at least over a month, so I can tell folks what happened with my mood and what happened with my skin. So I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again for coming on.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Jannine.
Hey, fellow health junkie. Thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that